Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Ortega. I'm here getting ready to look at chapter 40 with you. In this chapter, we look at basic principles of animal form and function, which essentially is looking at how animal organs, organ systems, tissues, all those function together. And so, starting out here, we want to take a look at some common themes, one of which is anatomy. So anatomy is defined as the biological form of an organism. So that's going to be the structure, how it's built, how it's put together. Anatomy is the form, whereas physiology is the function. So the biological functions an organism performs. How does it perform these functions? What comes out of these functions? Why are these functions useful? All of that's physiology, which combined together usually form a class that you take separately, A and B. And so this is an essential part of all organisms to understand both form and function. And so today we'll look at some unifying themes for animals, and looking at anatomy and physiology is one of those. Right. So another theme is how do animals exchange things with the environment? As you know, they need to take in nutrients, get rid of waste. They need to get oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide. Unless you're photosynthetic, and then you need that carbon dioxide. And so exchanging all those things with the environment is a big part of life. And so looking at how organisms do that is what we'll look at in this theme. So materials such as nutrients, waste, gas must be exchanged across the cell membrane. So going across the cell membrane is the up close thing to look at. And so that's what it boils down to, is going across that membrane. How you get across the membrane of all the cells. And so that can be a challenge for some organisms. And so the rate of exchange is always going to be proportional to the cell's surface area. So the amount of area that they have to exchange materials is going to be proportional to the cell's volume. And so that key theme we've looked at before is you want a high surface area to the volume. And so here we have a single cell. So starting with the smallest, the single cell organism is going to have enough surface area on itself to carry out all necessary exchanges. Whereas multicellular organisms, it gets a little bit more complex in that they need to have a body plan that will allow for the exchange to occur. And so an example of organisms with 2 cells thick, they're going to diffuse materials between cell to cell, and then on the cells they will allow exchange as well. And so that's what you see here. A single cell organism like the amoeba is going to be able to exchange directly with the environment on any part of its cell. Whereas the hydra here is a great example of the 2 cell layer thick body. And so the yellow, you can see here, the outer layer is going to exchange with the outer environment, and the inner layer is going to exchange with that inner gastrovascular cavity. But for other animals, they're going to need much more than that, as they are much more than 2 layers thick. Other animals that are thicker than 2 cells, like flatworms, most of their cells are in direct contact, and so they are capable of getting enough exchange because of their flat body plan. But for vertebrates and other complex organisms, they're going to have space between their cells. This is going to be filled with interstitial fluid that allows for movement into and out of cells. here. As I go through, I want to make sure we take a look here. I review. All right, and so the exchange here needs to happen over certain structures that allow for sufficient exchange. And so that's the development of organs. And so that's what you see here, and that for larger, more complex organisms, they're going to have specialized structures that will carry out these responsibilities. And so here you have the digestive system that will absorb the nutrients. And so the nutrients will go to the circulatory system. And so the circulatory system is going to spread the nutrients to all cells, and those cells are going to have interstitial fluid in between cells that the nutrients have to travel through. Then you have the respiratory system exchanging the oxygen and carbon dioxide. And so then you have the excretory system getting rid of waste, metabolic waste products. So that's the development of organs, which is the important idea from this section here, that the body plans have first tissues, so groups of cells that have a particular function. These tissues then make up organs, and together multiple organs make up organ systems. And so some organs, like for us, the pancreas is one that has more than one system it belongs to, so it has more than one function. And so its structure is going to be able to compensate for that. And so here you can see the table organ system in mammals with the organ system and its main components. Not something I ask you to memorize. And then here, organ system in mammal, the system with their main functions. Again, not something I ask you to memorize. All right, and so looking at animal tissues, we'll see there are 4 main categories of epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. And so these we'll want to focus on. And if you are taking, have taken, or will take anatomy, you will go through these too. And so for us, we focus on more general ideas and less of the details, as you do cover this extensively in anatomy class, especially if you take it with Collin College. All right, so moving to our first tissue, epithelial tissue. This will cover outside the body and will line hollow organs and cavities within the body. So essentially is our skin, and anything that forms a cavity, it will be part of that formation of the cavity. And so different epithelial tissue calls for different structures. And so here we have different cell types. So the first type is a cube or dice shape. That's cuboidal. Then you have a columnar, which is like a rectangular shape, and then squamous, which is like flat, like floor tiles. So those are the 3 types that we'll see in the next the image below. And then here they also have different arrangements. So they can have 1 layer of cells, which is single layer. They can have multiple layers of cells, which is called stratified. And then they have 1 layer of cells that looks like it's multiple layers, and so that's pseudo-stratified or false stratified. And so here are an example of epithelial tissue. We first have the cuboidal epithelium. This is your rectangle, here's your dice, your cube shape cell. If I can draw here. So it's nice, even on all sides, and usually have the nucleus towards the center. And these are known for forming ducts and glands. Not something you necessarily need to memorize, but just to help you understand. Cuboidal epithelial cells are normally found with ducts and glands. Then you have simple columnar epithelium. So this is 1 layer of the rectangular shaped cell. And so the rectangular shaped cell is going to have more of a structure like that. the heavy nucleus is going to go towards the bottom. And so normally in the intestine, you'll have little hair-like projections, microvilli on the top of the cell. And so that will help with absorbing things. So usually columnar is for absorption. Then squamous, simple squamous epithelium, the next one here, that is one layer of flat cells, which if you're looking at it from the side, it's going to be very flat, and then where the nucleus is going to bump up a little bit and then go back down. And so I like to think of it, if you're looking at it from maybe the top view, it kind of looks like a fried egg. So tiles or fried egg, this simple squamous epithelium is flat to allow for gas exchange to occur easily. And so you'll find it in the lungs, on the alveoli, you'll find it in the small capillaries, and so that's where squamous is found. Then you have your pseudostratified columnar epithelium, which is shown here. So it looks like there are multiple layers, but it's just one layer of cell, and that is found here in the trachea, leading to the lungs. And other places, but on this example, that's where it's found. And then lastly, stratified squamous epithelium is where there's going to be a lot of friction, a lot of like stress and loss of cells. So there's many layers to combat it. And so that is found here in the mouth, and obviously the outer skin is going to be another place where it's found. For skin, there's going to be a keratinization that occurs from the protein keratin to protect us from drying out, as well as other things like the oil layer. But again, not something you need to know. Just the types. So the 3 types here are actually 4 types, and then the simple versus stratified layering, what that means. So you see that in a real life picture here, and that there's the lumen, which is like the cavity probably of the intestine, and then you have actually probably a stomach. It looks like the part of the stomach, and that here you see a mucus secreting cell called a goblet cell. Not something you need to know, but interesting fact there. And that this layer of attachment to the rest of the body is called the basal surface. The top layer is called the apical surface, or the top section. And so this would be responsible for breaking down nutrients and then absorbing some nutrients as well. All right, so that ends our epithelial tissue. It brings us to the second type of tissue, connective tissue. Connective tissue mainly binds and supports other tissue. And so you can see that in the previous picture here, that all of this right there is connective tissue. And so connective tissue consists of liquid, jelly, or solid foundation, depending on what the need calls for and where it is in the organism. It can be sparsely packed, or it can be going to be condensely packed, depending on the type. And so there are 3 types of connective tissue fibers. They're all made up of protein. These are collagenous fibers, reticular fibers, and elastic fibers. And so those fibers are all providing different benefits, as the reticular fibers join connective tissue to other types of tissue. Collagenous fibers provide strength and flexibility, and elastic fibers stretch and snap back to their original length. While those are important, those actually are not the fibers that we'll want to, or section that we'll want to know for the test, but they are part of connective tissue, which is probably one of the biggest sections. And so it contains fibers and then cells, which are noted here, cells being fibroblasts and macrophages, things are very essential to connective tissue, but not something I like to focus on. So we'll focus on the 6 major types of tissue that's connective tissue. Loose connective tissue will help bind the epithelial skin layer to underlying tissues that holds organs in place. It's kind of like the in-between filling between different parts of the body. Then you have the fibrous connective tissue, which attaches muscles to bones and tendons, and bones to bones and ligaments. So fibrous is tendons and ligaments. And speaking of bone, that is a connective tissue. So this is going to be mineralized, adding calcium, magnesium, phosphate to the connective tissue, and it's going to form our skeleton, obviously providing support and stability to our bodies. Then you have adipose tissue that stores fat for insulation, keeping our body temperature, and fuel for breakdown of lipids for energy. Then we have blood, which is the 5th one here. Blood will be composed of different cells and cell fragments and blood plasma. Oh, Lord. And so we will look at that in our circulatory system chapter. And lastly, but not least, cartilage. Cartilage is strong and flexible support material that is going to be in different regions that we need flexible support in. And so those are shown here in this image. You can see how connective tissue will be in very many aspects of the body. And so it's going to be found pretty much everywhere in the body that you have the fibrous connective tissue connecting muscle to bone here. You have cartilage in between bones. You have fat tissue surrounding these bones. Then you have loose connective tissue connecting the skin layer to the fat layer. I mean, and then blood. It's just everywhere here, as you can see. And so you want to know these 6 groups. So pretty much all of this right here. And so that's connective tissue. Looking at muscle tissue, it's responsible for movement, as well as, the functions are important. So the functions of overall function. Functions are important here. All right. Where are we? Yes, muscle tissue. So muscle tissue consists of filaments of proteins. These proteins, actin and myosin, will working together along with calcium allow for muscles to contract. And so there are 3 different types of muscle tissue. Skeletal muscle tissue, which is for voluntary body movement. So it's attached to the bones and allows us to move. Then your smooth muscle is going to be involuntary body activities like digestion and other things, movement of the lungs as well. As partly with smooth muscle along with the esophagus. Smooth muscle helps with that. We have the cardiac muscle, which is responsible for pumping of the heart, the contraction and relaxation of the heart. So those are things you want to know. And so here you can see that skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. There are several differences, as you can tell. Skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle have these lines that are distinguishing what we call striations. These striations you can see along with very long fibers of skeletal muscle. Cardiac muscle actually has these lines. Called intercalculated discs that will help with transmission of signal. That's an E. Right, and so here you can see a video of cardiac muscle contracting. And that brings us to the fourth tissue, which is nervous tissue. It functions in the receiving, processing, and transmission of information. Nervous tissue has a very vital role in detecting different things like from our senses of what we see, what we smell, what we touch. Nervous tissue conducts some of those signals very quickly. So nervous tissue is made up of two main types of cells. There are actually many types of nervous tissue cells, but we'll look at this in the very last chapter just a little bit, and so we'll stick to just a general, very broad idea here. Ooh, what happened there? Okay. Oh. There we go. We'll stick to the main idea here that they have neurons and glial cells. So glial cells will support the neurons, and the neurons transmit the nerve impulse. And so looking at this, we can see the neurons consist of different cell parts. The dendrites on the outer part right here receive the signal. It goes through the cell body, which is that dense part in the middle, and then a transmission or sending out of an impulse will go through the long axon here. And so looking at that up close, we can see that here better. Dendrites all around here, cell body, and then axon. And so the glial cells will bind with and be next to the neuron cells and other cells like the circulatory system and other types of cells to help with that signal. And so comparing our signaling pathways, we have two systems that will conduct signals. One will be the endocrine system, by transmitting chemical signals that we call hormones to receptive cells in the body through the circulatory system, through the blood. And so only certain cells will receive that hormone and bind that hormone and then cause a change in response. And so this hormone may affect one or more regions throughout the body, and they are usually slow acting but have long-lasting effects. And so you can see an example here of that, where there's a stimulus for an endocrine cell to release the hormone. That signal travels everywhere through the circulatory system, but only certain cells will generate a response. And so comparing that to the nervous system will have a stimulus that will be received on the dendrites of that nerve cell. Then the nerve impulse will travel down through the axon to a specific location and generate a response. And so that's how the nervous system signal transmission is so fast. It happens in a matter of seconds or a fraction of a second. And so it depends on the information conveyed depends on the signal's pathway, not the type of signal it is, like the hormone. Endocrine system. And so looking at tissues and systems, one thing that we also like to group here is how do animals maintain their internal environment, and how do they control their environment as compared to their internal environment as compared to the outside environment. And so they're either going to regulate or conform. And so looking at that, a regulator is going to control their internal changes when the external environment fluctuates. So a regulator is going to basically maintain its own usually steady state of temperature or pH or whatever type of environment that they're faced with, where their external environment's different. And so their external environment, either, just to say, for temperature goes really, really hot, well, that regulator is going to keep their internal temperature normal, whereas a conformer is going to change the same way the external environment changes. And so here we can have some animals may regulate for temperature while conforming to other different properties. And so it doesn't necessarily matter in terms of looking at one instance, it may be a regulator, but in another instance, it may be a conformer. And so that's what you see here, in that the river otter is a temperature regulator for its body temperature, and the largemouth bass here is a temperature conformer. But one type of regulation that we want to look at is homeostasis. Homeostasis is when organisms maintain the steady state or internal balance regardless of the external environment. So for us humans, body temperature, blood pH, and glucose are all maintained at constant level no matter what's going on in the environment. And so how do you do that, you might ask? Well, first, the body must be able to register or realize for any given variable a fluctuation or an increase above or below a set point. And so this will be a stimulus that will start the alert. And so that will then need to be detected and have a response to it. And so it's just like maintaining room temperature in a building setting nowadays. So if you set the thermostat at 20 degrees Celsius, if the room temperature increases, so if the room fills up with college students, then that thermostat is going to turn the heater off in cold conditions. Let's say this is a winter time here. And so that's going to turn that heater off, and so that room temperature will decrease back to the set point. And so if the room temperature decreases, let's just say it gets colder, cold air rushes inside, then the thermostat's going to turn the heater on, and then the room will increase. So it keeps that set point by detecting and then making a response to a fluctuation. And so for homeostasis, for animals, is going to be relying on a process called negative feedback. So feedback is going to be something like an enzyme pathway usually that converts one product down this pathway to an end product, and this end product, when you have enough in concentration, is going to stop the first product from getting converted. And so that's negative feedback, where the end product regulates the whole process. And so the opposite of that is positive feedback, what amplifies the stimulus. So when the end product will make more of the product, so it will make this pathway go by faster. And so that is not usually found in homeostasis. And so looking at homeostasis in terms of cycle variation, in both animals and plants, there's a rhythm of every 24 hours, there's like a cycle of changes that occur. And so this is called circadian rhythm. And so looking at our example here, for human circadian rhythm, our body temperature will fluctuate and melatonin concentration will fluctuate based on the time of day. So our body temperature increases in the afternoon and evening hours, and then drops in the early morning hours as melatonin is made in higher concentrations for allowing for us to sleep. And then in the morning, our body temperature will increase, spiking us at some point to awaken, and the melatonin concentration decreases. And so this is a circadian rhythm, natural fluctuation of changes that occur every 24 hours. And so you can see that here as well, and that this example of a circadian clock at during sleep, which it looks like around 10 o'clock to 6:30, this person is asleep, and around 3 o'clock, it has its lowest heart rate, and then 5 o'clock, lowest body temperature, and then that temperature would assume to spike up along with blood pressure as they awaken. Early morning is the highest risk of cardiac arrest for this person. As they hit noon, eat lunch, then they're going to have a faster reaction time in the afternoon with greatest muscle strength in the evening. And so their melatonin secretion starts before they go to sleep. So all this happens in a 24-hour period, normal fluctuations within their cycles. So that's a circadian rhythm. So that essentially covers chapter 40. I try to keep this one short as most people are familiar with these topics already. But if you are confused or need some additional help, please let me know. And until then, bye-bye for now.